Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In the 21st century, much of our American news cycle is dominated by our tense relationship with Russia. Now, this tension is somewhat of a leftover effect of the Cold War, and that's, of course, along with various current geopolitical controversies. You can watch the news to learn more about those. One word we hear tossed when we speak of the Russian people, though, is the Kremlin. Now, what is the Kremlin, and what is its purpose for the Russian people? Well, as we'll see in this episode, there's actually a very long history to this highly controversial feature of Russian civilization. So first, let's define our terms. What is the Kremlin? Is it the Russian army, or a building, or something else? Well, the best explanation of the Kremlin is that it is the governmental district of Russia. It's the main hub of Russian power in the center of its capital city of Moscow. Now, reporters will often use the word Kremlin as shorthand for the Russian government, but in reality, it's actually the medieval seat of the Russian rule in the capital city. Now, going all the way back to the Middle Ages, construction of the medieval Kremlin was built in the 14th century, with its most notable structures completed in the 15th and 16th centuries by mostly Italian architects. The fortress walls, governmental buildings, and the Eastern Orthodox cathedrals in the complex were largely overseen by the Russian Tsar Ivan III in the late 15th century, and the czars that followed continued to add or improve upon it. The district is covered with museums, government buildings, mausoleums, smaller cathedrals, and fortresses. Now, the Kremlin has held the seat of Russian power since the late Middle Ages. It was the center of the Russian Empire, beginning with Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century, and this goes all the way up to the reign of the final Tsar Nicholas II of the Romanov dynasty in the beginning of the 20th century. When the empire was overthrown by the Bolsheviks and then replaced with the communist dictatorship of the USSR, the Kremlin remained as the center of Soviet power. Now, even after the collapse of the USSR just a generation or so ago, the citadel of the Kremlin is still the main governmental district of the Russian rule. Now, the Kremlin is, like the history of its people, highly controversial. While serving as the home of one of the more ruthless and notorious dictatorships in world history, it has also cultivated some of the most beautiful and ornate houses of worship in the history of Christendom, including, for example, the white and gold Cathedral of the Annunciation from the late 15th century. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.